Hi everyone, my name is Jacqueline. I am a PhD student at the University of Florida, specializing in agricultural communications, and I am one of the producers for this Streaming Science, The Water Around Us episode. Thank you for hanging with us as we kind of figure out the technology and get the program started. At the University of Florida, specializing in agricultural communications, and I am one of the producers for this Streaming Science.
He is our speaker
The Water
today,
Around
and he's
Us
a grad
episode.
student within
Thank
the urban,
you for
soil, and
hanging
water
with us as we kind of figure out the technology and get the program started.
And Adam, you are on.
Hello, everyone. My name is Adam Siders. I'm a PhD student at the University of Florida in the Soil and Water Sciences Department. And I was asked to be a part of the Streaming Science program. And so I want to thank you, Jacqueline and Teresa, for giving me the opportunity to do this. This is a really cool experience. And today I'm going to be talking a little bit about my work studying manatees in springs ecosystems in Florida. So we'll just go ahead and get started here. Give a little bit of an introduction here. So like I said, I'm doing a PhD right now. I got a master's in biology from Northern Arizona University, and I went to Kansas State University and got my bachelor's degrees in fisheries and wildlife biology and French. And so the areas of my research that I'm going to be talking today about are food web ecology and freshwater invertebrates and some nutrient cycling work. But in my past, I've also done some studies on leaf decomposition for my master's. I'm a master's in from Northern Arizona University, and I went to Kansas State University and got my bachelor's degrees in biology. So let's go ahead and move on to the big picture of my work today about our, let's see, I'm kind of getting some feedback here. Let's see. Alrighty. So the big picture, we're studying how manatees impact freshwater ecosystems. Manatees are abundant in some freshwater ecosystems, mostly in the Crystal River and along the coast of Florida. And in some of these systems, they're the predominant grazers, grazing on eel grasses, which is a freshwater grass species. There's also marine grasses, but they feed predominantly on eel grasses when they're in these freshwater ecosystems, and eat marine grasses when they're out at sea. Threats to manatees are similar to freshwater ecosystem threats, and so we'll discuss some of those later on today. But for today, what I'll be talking about is freshwater food webs, the role of ecosystem subsidies, the role of organisms in ecosystem function, and finally, I'll move on to talk about some of my current research on manatees. And so we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide here. So we'll go through some definitions here, some things that I'm going to be bringing up. So first of all, ecology is the study of organisms and their interactions with one another in the environment. Ecosystems are all living and non-living community constituents. So this could be, in an aquatic ecosystem, the fish, the invertebrates, algae, grasses, and then, everything that's abiotic, so everything that's non-living. So it could be like the sediment, the water quality, the water chemistry, things like that. An ecosystem subsidy are energy and nutrients that are produced in one environment and transported into another. And we'll go into some examples of this in a second, but these are just energy created in one ecosystem and then transported to another, either through the movement of the energy, either through animals being able to physically move, or could also be transported by physical processes such as the wind or gravity. Food webs are a network of consumer resource interactions occurring in an ecosystem. A nutrient is any element required for life, but there's a heavy focus on nitrogen and phosphorus. But we could also talk about things such as iron, magnesium, manganese, things like that. But there's a heavy focus when we talk about nutrients on nitrogen and phosphorus. And finally, eelgrasses are these aquatic grasses that I previously mentioned. We got a slide off to the right. It's just a grass that lives in aquatic ecosystems. And so we'll go on to the next slide here. I believe we have a break for questions. So if there's any questions now, we can go ahead and take some of those before we get rolling with the rest of this.
So I'm going to turn it over to Jacqueline and let her talk about any questions we have.
Oops. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. So I was just saying that as we're waiting for more questions to come in, I have one for you. Do you mind telling us if someone wanted to become a water scientist, and specifically if someone wanted to go and be working with manatees, what do they have to do?
What do you have to do? Let's see. So this opportunity kind of just fell in my lap. Kind of moving to Florida and everything, coming to the university here. But I'd say try to get as much experience as you can outdoors, and just be outside a lot, observe what you see in the natural environment, and then just be curious about things. Always be thinking about questions, thinking about why things are the way that they are, and if you're looking into colleges, I would say look into definitely biology programs along the coast if you're wanting to study manatees or other aquatic organisms. But definitely look into programs in probably more coastal places. I, for example, started my undergraduate degree, or went to Kansas State for my undergraduate degree, and never dreamed that I would be studying manatees. And here I am in Florida now doing this kind of work. So I'd say probably try to find a university along a coastal school, and just spend a lot of time outside and try to get internships along the way when you're in college or otherwise, just doing outdoor education and working on research projects like that.
Great. And one last question, unless anyone else comes up with them, but what is your favorite fun fact or misconception about manatees?
My favorite fun fact about manatees. Well, I guess since I'm kind of the poop guy here, that they poop a lot, that they can probably poop. I think we have estimates of. Let me go down. I think I have it in one of my later slides here. But they can poop. Where is it? I think they can poop. Oh man. Well, they poop a lot. So I think we estimated like 30 kilograms or 30 pounds of feces per day. So that's probably one of my favorite facts. And then when you get a lot of manatees in a specific site, you can, 100 manatees times 30 pounds, you're getting a lot of poo. So that's probably one of my favorite facts, being the manatee poo guy, as I am now known.
Yeah, very good. That is a fun fact. So it looks like we don't have any other questions in the group as of now, but as we said, that if you guys have any questions as we keep going, post them in that chat box, and I'll make sure to announce them at our next question break.
Cool. Alrighty. So we're going to move on to the next slide. I think if we're ready for that, slide on aquatic food webs. I'm just going to start introducing aquatic food webs here, if we're ready for that. Okay. So this is a freshwater food web in an aquatic ecosystem. This is in particular in a stream. And so the two food bases in freshwater food webs are algae and dead leaves. And so we have algae on the far left hand of this diagram, the far bottom left, and then we have dead leaves that are falling into this stream environment. So this is just a cross section of a stream. And so algae are produced within the synthesis, but leaves are produced outside of the stream. So in many headwater streams, actually probably in most headwater streams, where you have a lot of shading by the trees surrounding the stream, there's not a whole lot of light being able to enter the stream. And so you'll have algae not actually being the predominant food base in headwater streams, small headwater streams. You'll actually have dead leaves that fall into the stream from outside the ecosystem being the predominant food base in smaller headwater streams. And so leaves, as we talked about earlier, would be considered a subsidy to these freshwater ecosystems. And then, so what feeds on the algae and what feeds on the leaves? So we have these stream invertebrates tending to be insects, maybe algae, grazers, things such as snails could also be eating a lot of algae where algae occurs. But you'll have these freshwater invertebrates, such as these aquatic insects here. In this diagram here, we've got mayflies and stoneflies. So I don't know if there's any fly fishermen out there, but when you hear fishermen, especially fly fishermen, talking about the insects and the caddisflies or the mayflies, whatever, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about these aquatic insects that live inside the stream. And a lot of these insects will be eaten by higher trophic levels, things such as fishes. But if we follow this diagram up, we have this emergence arrow, and we have these aquatic invertebrates, the insects anyways, will grow wings and they'll have a terrestrial adult stage. And so they live their larval stage underwater, but they'll have a winged terrestrial adult stage, and they will come to the surface of the water. They'll allow their wings to dry along the banks of the stream or along rocks, and then they will, what we call, emerge out of the stream, and they can feed other things in the terrestrial ecosystem, such as spiders, bats, birds, and lizards. So they can feed terrestrial predators. This is a really important ecosystem subsidy in streams and other aquatic environments. But so when we talk about subsidies, a couple of the subsidies that we can think of from this image here are leaves falling into the stream because the leaves were produced on land, and then they are consumed and broken down in the water. We can think of emergence, so these aquatic insects growing up in the aquatic environment, and then when they become adults, they'll fly out of the stream and feed terrestrial predators. And finally, we can think about terrestrial invertebrates on the far left there falling into the stream and feeding things such as fish or trout or otherwise. And so this is what we think of when we think about aquatic food webs and subsidies. And so we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide here and talk a little bit about other forms of subsidies in freshwater environments in the form of Pacific salmon. So Pacific salmon are a really well-known subsidy. They are born in freshwater environments, and then they migrate out to the oceans to grow and to mature. But then once they become mature adults, they will migrate back into freshwater ecosystems and reproduce and die. And their rotting carcasses can represent a really important nutrient subsidy and food subsidy for for the things living in the stream, such as algae, such as invertebrates. And so that's a really well-known example of a subsidy. And because of their migratory nature, we expect manatees to function similarly to Pacific salmon, because manatees will migrate in and out of freshwater ecosystems. They will enter freshwater ecosystems in the winter months because they are spring-fed down here in Florida anyways, and they are a constant 72 degrees Fahrenheit. And so manatees will migrate into freshwater ecosystems during the winter months to seek thermal refuge when the oceans become colder. And so we'll move on to the next slide here, talking a little bit more about manatees. And so the Florida manatee averages 1,000 pounds. They can eat up to 100 pounds of eelgrass per day. And then I guess, like I previously said, they live mostly at sea, but can migrate into warmer freshwater springs in the winter months. And that's mostly for thermoregulation, to keep warm, because despite their large size, they actually don't thermoregulate very well, and they don't have a lot of insulating blubber. And they can number over 200 individuals at a single location. And so when they get to an individual spring, they can be in really high numbers. And as we previously said, they can defecate 300 pounds of feces per day. And so when you get lots of manatees, you get lots of poo going on there. And so we'll go on to the next slide now, and I'll talk a little bit about my research. And so the overarching theme of my research is looking at how do manatees affect freshwater food webs and nutrient cycling. And my first hypothesis is that manatee feces functions as a food source for invertebrates and stimulates their production. And my second hypothesis is that manatee urine and feces alters algal nutrient limitation status. And that first hypothesis is based around the idea that in a lot of these freshwater food webs, you have organic matter such as those dead leaves, like we saw in the previous slide, functioning as an important food source for invertebrates. And so that's what we're going to be looking at here for this first hypothesis. The second hypothesis kind of revolves around the fact that manatees pee and poo a lot, and this is, really high in nitrogen content, the manatee feces and urine. And so that's kind of the rationale behind this other hypothesis. And so we'll go on to the next slide now, and we'll talk about kind of a conceptual diagram about my research. And so we've got the manatees eating the grasses, first off, moving from left to right. And so that's a benefit for the manatees. The manatees poop a lot, and then what we expect is these freshwater invertebrates on the far right. This is an amphipod. It's actually a crustacean. We expect them to be benefiting from this poop because it's got a lot of this organic matter in it. It's got dead grass material in it, kind of like what we thought about with the dead leaves example on that food web slide. So this is kind of what we think about when we think about that first hypothesis from the invertebrates benefiting. And we'll move on to the next slide, and we got the same general idea. The manatees are eating the grasses. The grass are benefiting the manatees. They're pooping a lot, and they're also peeing a lot. And this poop and pee is rich in nitrogen. And so we think that will possibly stimulate algal nutrient. That will stimulate algal production because there's added nutrients to the water column. And so we'll go in to the next slide now, talking more in depth about my research. It takes place in the Crystal River, Florida. And what we're currently doing is we were doing until COVID-19 outbreak, but collecting invertebrates through monthly sediment coring, where we take a core, like you can see in the bottom right. It's probably about 10 inches in diameter, and we shove that into the sediment to a depth of about 10 centimeters, and we collect all of the invertebrates that are living in the sediments there. And so we have one site that we have manatees and one site without manatees, that we're looking at differences through over time and comparing those two sites to one another as well. And we're going to be then measuring invertebrate sizes under a microscope and estimating invertebrate growth rates across seasons and month to month. We don't have any results yet because we're doing our ongoing sampling, but so we'll have to get back to you guys on that with some of the results. But as you can see in the bottom right, we definitely have manatees coming to help us out with the invertebrate sampling, so that's pretty fun there. And they just show up, you're just out there and they're there. So that's a really fun aspect of the research. Taking the cores back to the boat, and then the manatees will just still be hanging out there wondering what the heck you're doing. So we'll go on to, actually, before we take a quick break, I have 2 videos that we want to show. So let's go ahead and play that first video now. Let me see here. See if we can play these 2 videos here. Let me...
So Adam, can you tell us what you saw in those videos? Can you describe what they were?
Yeah, so in these first videos, the first one was just a manatee in Ichitucknee Spring. We were snorkeling out there, and there happened to be some manatees out there. Just kind of a fun video showing how they kind of affect the environment through stirring up of the sediments, which is another research project that I'm going to be working on, is looking at their effects on stirring of the sediment and suspended total suspended solids in the water column. I'll show some of that data here. Also, just kind of funny just to see the poor manatee getting stuck under the log. I saw that happening, and I was like, oh man, I got to get this on video. So that was pretty great. The second video was a video of a study that I'm going to talk about a little bit more next, but that was me swimming down and looking at some of the manatee feces. You can see there was all kinds of manatee feces all surrounding that nutrient diffusing substrates that I'm going to talk about here shortly. But yeah, so that was just two for fun videos, and looking to kind of show you guys what the manatee poop looks like. And so I think we're ready for the next question break, so I can take questions now if there are any.
Yes. All right. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Jacqueline. So Jacqueline, go ahead.
Yeah, so it is question time, and boy, do we have a lot of really, really good questions. So first things first, Allison would like to know, where have you, Adam, found the most manatees?
So I've seen the most manatees at Three Sister Springs. That's a specific site within the Crystal River. It's a well-known site for seeing manatees. The most I've probably seen out there in a single day was 150, but I've been told there can be over 200 or 300 at a time, depending on what the temperatures are like. When the temperatures are colder, you're going to tend to have them just kind of hanging out because they don't want to go looking for food. They just really need to stay hunkered down near that spring. And so yeah, that's what I would say is I've seen the most at Three Sister Springs.
Great. Our next question is from Claire, and she wants to know, how long do manatees live and what happens to their bodies when they die?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. Manatees live, I'm not totally sure. I think they can live over 30 years. I'm not super up on my manatee facts, but usually what happens to their bodies when they die is so if they're at sea, they probably won't be found. But if they are in Florida, if they're off like really near shore and they are able to be found, they've been recovering a lot of those lately, or I guess for the past several years they recover them and do necropsies where they dissect them out and kind of try to determine the cause of death, which can be important in determining, threats to manatees. Was it a boating collision? Was it a harmful algal bloom, for example? And so usually they remove them if they can find them, but otherwise, if they don't, once they die, like anything else, it sinks to the bottom of the ocean or a spring, and will decompose from there and be food source and nutrients for everything else in the food web.
Great. So we have our next question is from Anthony, and he wants to know, what does manatee poo feel like?
Yeah, so it feels, it's soft. It kind of breaks up in your hand right away. It's a lot like, I'd say like horse poop or cow poop, but it's waterlogged, and so it breaks up pretty quickly. And once it breaks up, it kind of just disintegrates right away. So we have to, when we are collecting it, we have to kind of hold it tightly so it doesn't just break up on the way, transferring it to a bag to save it.
Okay. On the same kind of topic, our next question is from Mary, and she wants to know, do manatees pass gas, and what does their poo smell like?
They definitely pass gas, and
Adam, I think you might be frozen.
I just got booted. I don't know what happened. Can you guys still hear me?
You are back now. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
We can we'll pick up where we left off.
Okay. Yeah, so the poop, it definitely smells like you would think. You don't realize how smelly it is until you take your snorkel mask off, though. And so the snorkel mask definitely helps us when we're out there. And actually, the first time I found it, I was really excited. And I had my mask on, and I had a buddy with me who was in the boat. And I go, Steve, smell this. Does this smell like poop to you? Because I wasn't sure, because it looked like it was covered in algae. And he's like, that's definitely poop. And so I have to give a shout out to Steve and thank him for being my guinea pig when I had my mask on that day. I guess I could have done it myself, but I was overcome by excitement. So I had to know right away. And yes, but yeah, it definitely has a distinct smell to it. And you definitely want to wash your hands after handling it.
Good to know. Good to know. Okay. Next question is from Deb. So she wants to know, can too many manatees in a warm water spring have a negative impact? For example, there have been over 500 manatees in Blue Spring during the winter, and that is a lot of poop.
Yeah, so manatees can probably have negative impacts. It's hard to say, what these are exactly, and that's kind of what we're trying to look at here, is to see kind of all the impacts. Are they positive or negative? And so, for example, out at Kings Bay anyways, people sometimes don't like the manatees because they think that they're eating all of the grasses and stuff like that, which they definitely do eat a lot of grasses, but so they can have negative influences in that regard. But yeah, I don't know. There hasn't really been, studies on any of this stuff yet. And so that's kind of what we're trying to do with our research is look at the ecological impacts of manatees from an objective standpoint and not with any preconceived notions. I started all this research just kind of out of interest when I found out I was moving here to Florida, thinking, well, they migrate. They're just like these Pacific salmon, like I talked about previously. So we're trying to look at this objectively and see what their impacts are.
Great. We have a couple more questions. So Mary asked, Do the nutrients decrease in older manatees in comparison to the babies?
Do the nutrients increase in older manatees relative to the babies? So that's kind of a more elemental cycling in the body kind of question. I'm not entirely sure. I would expect there to be, overall more nutrients in a larger animal just because they're larger, but the nutrients are going to be released through defecation and urination, and so what are the relative influences of those on young manatees versus old? I can't really say, but for overall, I would expect a larger manatee to be probably defecating and urinating more, and so I'd expect more higher inputs of nutrients from a larger manatee is what I would expect anyways.
Okay, great. Couple more. So Josh says, I know you're working with manatees, and some people at the vet school also work on them. My question is, have you guys worked together to share information about the manatees, such as diseases that can be transferred from manatee to human?
Yeah, so I haven't really been working with too many people in the vet school. I'm more focused on kind of their ecological impacts, but that is something I'm interested in. It's something other people have brought up before, such as potential pathogens in the feces. But yeah, I should definitely reach out to the vet school and see if there's any people interested in things like that, and see if there's some potential collaborations we could do and work on together.
Great. Annabella asked, how long are manatees?
How long? So I think the largest manatees can get is to about 11 or 12 feet is kind of their max size. And they can get over 1,000 pounds, probably around 12 to 14,000 or 12 to 1,400 pounds, I think would be the max size. But yeah, they can get up to about 11 to 12 feet.
Great. And our last question as of now, unless people come in with more, Deb wants to know, have you done any research at Blue Spring?
I haven't done research at Blue Spring. I was hoping to try to do some work out there, but there was it wasn't working out. We weren't able to figure everything out, but that is a place that we were hoping to do research, but just because of logistical constraints, it's a bit further from the other sites. It's a really different ecosystem from the Crystal River, for one, as well. It's more of a riverine ecosystem. We weren't able to really justify do research out there, but that is something that I'd be definitely interested in doing in the future, though.
Great. I don't see any other questions at this time, but if anyone does have any, just leave them in the comments and we'll get to them next time. So I think that's it for now. Thanks, Adam.
All right, cool. So we'll move on to the next slide, talking a little bit more about my research, going into hypothesis 2, that manatee urine and feces alters algal nutrient limitation status. And as I had kind of previously mentioned, urine and feces are really rich in nitrogen. And so when we have a lot of manatees congregating and we have a lot of manatee feces and urine in the system, because of that, we want to see how that affects algae, since algae are going to be the ones directly using these nitrogen sources. And so what we did was we used nutrient diffusing substrata to measure nutrient limitation at sites with and without manatees and across seasons. And I'm going to try to talk about these a little bit and try to talk about these as clearly as possible. But we got two pictures of what those look like on the far right. And basically what they are agar-filled cups with added nitrogen, phosphorus, or both. And we have placed a little disc on top of them. And so this agar is just a medium that people use to grow and culture microbes. And it also functions to just keep these nutrients in place and to diffuse out slowly. And so we're not adding a ton of nutrients in there. It's just enough to basically surround the little disc that we have placed on top, these white disc with the nutrient of choice. So we have nitrogen treatments where we added only nitrogen, and we have phosphorus treatments, but they're all right next to each other. So we know that there's just so little nutrient coming out of there, but it's in high concentration. It's only going to be surrounding that immediate disk right there. And so if we have a disk with, or if we have an agar-filled cup with nitrogen and one with phosphorus right next to each other, they wouldn't be affected by one another. What we wanted to do was measure how much algae grows in the nutrient treatments relative to the controls with no nutrients. And so what we expect is that if algae is nutrient limited, we expect more algae growth in nutrient treatments when manatees are absent, and on the control treatments when manatees are present. And so hopefully this wasn't too much right now. I'm going to try to break it down a little bit more clearly in the next slide of how we expect this to work out. And so we'll go on to the next slide now, the nutrient limitation example. And we have two graphs here. We're going to focus on the one on the left for now, so only look at the one on the left for right now. If we have no nutrient limitation, then when we have the control treatment in green compared to the nitrogen treatment in red, we expect no differences in algal biomass, which is going to be on that y-axis, on that vertical axis there. So if we have no nutrient limitation of these algae, we expect that the algal biomass in the control disk to be similar to that of the algae biomass on the nitrogen disk. However, if we do have nitrogen limitation, for example, when compared to the algae on the control disk, we expect there to be a lot more algae on the nitrogen disk if, relative to the control if we have nitrogen limitation. So hopefully that can kind of clear up things a little bit more about how I'm doing this. It's all relative to a control when we're looking at nutrient limitation status. So we're going to get algae on, we expect to get algae on all disk, we expect to get algae on control disk, on disks that have the nitrogen added to them, and disks that have the phosphorus added to them. But we expect when nutrient limitation occurs, we will see more algal growth on the nutrient treatments relative to the control. And so we'll move on to the next slide now about what we expect with nutrient limitation. And what we expect is that when manatees are absent, we expect there to be higher nitrogen or higher algal biomass on the left. So on the graph on the left, we expect there to be higher algal biomass on the nitrogen treatment relative to the control treatment when manatees are absent. However, on the right, when we look at the next slide, or not the next slide, I'm sorry, on the graph on the right, when we have manatees present, we expect there to be no differences between the control algal biomass and the nitrogen, or the algal biomass on the nitrogen disk there. So we're just looking at relative differences in algal biomass on control treatments relative to nutrient added treatments. And so we'll move on to the next slide now. Some of our results. So our results are still pending. We're still in the processes of analyzing these data. We're trying to look at algal biomass right now on the studies that we've already conducted. We conducted these studies before the manatees were present and after the manatees were present. So in October and then again in January. And at all sites, I can say anecdotally that we visibly seem to have much lower algal biomass when there was manatee presence, but I'm still need to look at these data. Our machine, we can't use our machine right now because of the COVID situation that we're trying to analyze our algal biomass data with. But we think that there could be possibly light limitation due to increased suspended solids in the water column, which is what I have here on the graph below. So on the x-axis here, we have our three different springs that we're looking at that have manatees. We have Jurassic Spring, Three Sisters Spring, which gets a lot of manatees, as we previously said, and Homosassa Springs. And on the y-axis, we have total suspended solids. And the differences between the green and the red bars are when manatees were present versus when manatees are absent, which are the green bars. And what we saw was a lot more total suspended solids in the water column when the manatees were present versus when they were absent. And total suspended solids could be anything. It could be manatee poop, for example. It could be other dead organic matter. It could be sediment. Anything that's stirred up in the sediment and that's suspended in the water column is going to go into this total suspended solid measurement here. And so what we can see is that we have a lot more total suspended solids at all of our manatee sites when the manatees were present than when they were absent. And so what we think was happening is that we were getting light limitation. And so the algae, regardless of how many nutrients were in the water, they just couldn't photosynthesize due to inability of light to reach the bottom of these systems. And so I think before we go on to the next questions, we're going to play video 3. And so let's see if we can play video 3 right now.
What happened in that video?
Yeah, so in that last video there, what we have going on, that was me with our experiment going on, the nutrient diffusing substrates out in the water. And I just wanted to, the idea of that video is to just show that, there's a lot of manatees in the water when we're doing these experiments. You can visibly see there's a lot of particles in the water too. And so a lot of things are being stirred up by the manatees during this. And so then I panned over just to show the manatees and then also to show the experiment going on. And so that's what we had going on in that video. And so what our results may indicate for management strategies is that management strategies to reduce algae in the Crystal River may be best taken place in the winter due to possible reduced photosynthesis. I want to kind of taper this right now because the results are still pending and everything. But if there's limited photosynthesis happening when the manatees are present because of the increased total suspended solids in the water, then perhaps the winter months might be a good time to target restoration and to try to get rid of the algae. Because there's a big algae problem out in the Crystal River, and there's some teams trying to work on that and to get rid of the algae. So that could be a potential implication of our results, but I would say take that with a grain of salt for now. And with that, I think we're ready for our next question break, and so we can dive into questions now if we have any.
Yeah, go ahead, Jacqueline.
Yeah, we have one question so far. I might have some more come in. They want to know, are manatees an indicator species for water quality?
So I would say no, manatees are not an indicator species for water quality because they're highly mobile, so they're able to move in between habitats that have good versus poor water quality. And so, first of all, they're highly mobile and they can move if they're not happy with the water quality. However, invertebrates would be an example of an indicator species, especially what we know as the EPT taxa, the Ephemeroptera, the Plecopterans, and the Trichopterans, the mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies, because they're not able to move from the water quality, and they are sensitive to poor water quality. Another thing, too, is that manatees breathe air, and so versus aquatic insects, which don't, which respire through the water. Which extract oxygen from the water. So no, I would say manatees could not be considered indicator species for water quality.
Great. I have a question for you, Adam. So we've seen
Yeah.
all these really great videos of you in the water with the manatees. Have you ever seen an alligator, and are they predators to manatees?
I've never seen an alligator in the water with me, which is good. I'd rather not see them when I'm out there myself. It'd be cool if I was from a distance, but especially when the water's stirred up a lot, would not want to see one then. I thought I was in the water with one once, but it turned out there was just a giant snook that darted out, and that was pretty scary because I was in some swampy habitat then. But no, I haven't seen one. But manatees also, as you also asked, do not have any known natural predators.
Good. That is all the questions I see for now.
Okay. Cool. Well, I think we're just about done here. I've got 2 more slides. I'll probably just combine these together and not do a question break in between. We can just kind of save questions for the end. Some fun facts. As I just previously said, and kind of segues into this, have no natural predators. So alligators actually don't predate on manatees. Sharks don't either. I think there's actually a video on YouTube you can look for. I think there's a video on YouTube of an alligator hitching a ride on a manatee's back, which is kind of funny. So I'd encourage you to check that out. It's a smaller gator than the manatee, but it's pretty funny. They're very curious, and they want to interact with you, but they do get spooked when there's a lot of people in the water at once. And so kind of earlier on in the season, you'll have probably more close manatee interactions when they come in to the springs in November, December. But when more and more people start getting to the springs in January and February, they kind of start being done with people. So they're very curious. Manatees may have barnacles on their backs when they're at sea, and so you can kind of use that as an indicator of how long manatees have been at sea relative to the freshwater ecosystems, especially in the early season. When you start to get manatees there, you'll see a lot of barnacles on the backs of manatees in the months of November and to December as well. So that can be an indicator versus just having algae on their backs, which will happen more when they're in freshwater. There's 3 other species of manatees in the order Sirenia. There's the Amazonian manatee, which lives in the Amazon and off the coast of Brazil at the Amazon Delta. There's the African manatee, which lives off the coast of South Africa. And there's the dugong, which is actually not a manatee, but we'll throw it in there. And those live off the coast of Australia and the Indo-Pacific Oceans. And there's one other, the Steller sea cow, which is extinct. I think it became extinct in the 1500s, 1600s, which lived up in the Bering Sea in between Alaska and Russia. And those were massive. Those were twice as big as the Florida manatees that we have here. Those can get up to 25 to 30 feet long, but unfortunately explorers resulted in them becoming extinct, killing them for their blubber or for their meat and whatnot. So no more Steller sea cows, unfortunately. And then finally, I'd say snorkeling is amazing. I highly encourage you guys to snorkel as much as you can, even in small streams. It's just such an incredible experience. I first snorkeled in a stream a couple of years ago, and I had been out in the oceans and otherwise. But even snorkeling in small streams is really fun too, just because you can see what's going on in the streams. And we often focus on what we can see more than anything else. And especially it's difficult in aquatic ecosystems, in freshwater and marine ecosystems, to really know what's going on unless you can see it. We can measure things, obviously, but it's really fun to just snorkel in streams, see crayfish and other fish, and even in your small streams, aquatic insects, and just how things move. You can see the movement of the water, the movement of the rocks in the stream. It's an incredible experience. So I'd encourage people to snorkel as much as you can, even if it's a small stream by your house, as long as it's safe to do so there. And so we'll go on to our last slide, calls to action. Manatees face similar threats as springs and other aquatic habitats, and nutrient pollution can result in harmful algal blooms, which are bad for the springs ecosystems, and it can also kill manatees. I think back in 2018 was a really bad year for harmful algal blooms, and it was the leading cause of manatee deaths that year. I believe over 500 manatees died because of these harmful algal blooms in 2018. And also algae can replace native eel grasses. So when we have these harmful algal blooms, they can shade out and actually shade out the eel grasses and become dominant and result in regime shifts from being eelgrass dominated to algal dominated. And other threats to the springs are things such as groundwater pumping, which can decrease flow and then also increase algae in these spring environments because we really need the flow from these rivers and these spring environments to scour the surfaces to really knock the algae out of there and push it downstream rather than being able to persist kind of around the spring heads where the algae can be and persist when you have reduced flow out of the springs. And so finally, some things that we can do to help protect springs and manatees are reduce our nutrient use and reduce our water use. So ways to reduce nutrient use could be things such as fertilizing less and driving less because these result in nutrients being released in the environment, driving through combustion of the fossil fuels, fertilizing, obviously just a straight nutrient input into the aquatic environments. And some ways to reduce water use include things such as reduce watering lawns, taking shorter showers, taking less showers, and actively thinking of ways to reduce water use throughout your life. I guess some people will have common thing people talk about is brushing your teeth with the water on. I don't know why you need water running while you're brushing your teeth, so things like that. And just actively think of ways in your everyday life. I'm sure you can think of things, maybe measuring out just the proper amount of water when you're cooking, don't overfilling your pots and pans for stuff like that. But yeah, that's about all I have for you guys for today. I think we'll have another session of questions, but I want to thank you guys for tuning in. I want to thank Teresa and Jacqueline for having me on here, and thank all of my helpers out in the field who've helped me out, and my advisors and my committee members, and Crystal River Kayak in particular for helping us out with getting out to Three Sister Springs, and so shout out to them too. But with that, I think I can take any more questions if we have any more and start wrapping things up here.
Yeah, so Jacqueline, we probably have time for like 2 really good questions, so pick out.
Okay, so I have been informed that we have time for 2 really good questions, which is very convenient because we have 2 questions in the chat. So if anyone has a third question, it has to be really good, and you got to put it in right now. Okay, the last few questions. Mary wants to know, do manatees interact with dolphins, and would dolphin poo apply to your hypothesis and your questions too?
Yeah, so manatees probably don't interact with dolphins that much, at least when they're in the freshwater ecosystems. I actually did see dolphins out at our spring sites, so in freshwater, twice when I was picking up the nutrient diffusing substrates in Homosassa and also in Catfish Spring as well. But they probably don't really interact with manatees that much. But dolphin feces probably has a really big impact in marine systems, though. I was actually in the middle of reading a paper right now talking about whales, and whales being huge nutrient sources because they dive deep and then they bring these nutrients up. And so dolphins probably don't dive as deep as whales, but also dolphins can probably also be a source of nutrients for marine environments, though.
Great. Hey, last question. Adam, what do you hope to do next after you graduate?
Oh, man. Still trying to figure that out myself. But I think, teaching and doing research would be fun, probably at a smaller level, less what should I say? pressure to do research. I enjoy teaching a lot, but also I think doing research at an agency would also be enjoyable, and really helping to do things on the ground, work on issues on the ground and applied issues would be something that I'd also be really interested in. But yeah, still trying to figure it out myself, though.
Okay. Teresa, there was a third question. Do we have time, or can we just respond to? Okay, last question. Okay, very quickly. Jack wants to know, what is the biggest danger to manatees?
I think humans definitely the biggest danger to manatees. Boating collisions have been on the rise, especially last year. 2019 was a really bad year for manatee deaths due to boating collisions, and it's probably due to the fact that they were downlisted from endangered to threatened. They should still have the same protection under the Endangered Species Act, at least now, as a threatened species as they do as an endangered species, but that might change given what's happening in the current administration. But that was a controversial issue, downlisting them from endangered to threatened, and probably shouldn't have happened. But yeah, and then algal blooms are also bad too. So yeah, that's what we've got.
Okay, thank you guys so much for listening. Have a great day, and thank you so much.